streaming channels. We are doing this today on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I have a pretty cool guest today, John Yunker from Byte Level Research, who publishes the Globalization Report Card. Every year, has been doing it for a very long time. If you haven't heard about the Globalization Report Card, that's what we're going to be talking about today. You need to know about it. John, welcome, sir.
Hi, Tucker. How you doing? It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Really quickly, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Nimsy Insights, we are a market research and consulting company. We specialize in helping brands go global, helping global brands that are already in local markets better connect with their customers. Our background is largely in this industry we call localization, this whole shadow industry that helps the wheels turn and help things get translated and localized and ready for global audiences. And if you can't tell, I'm still working on that sales pitch. But give us a call.
It's excellent. Yeah, it's excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, without further ado here, I want to turn it over to you, John, and tell us, what is the Globalization Report Card? How long have you been doing it? Background.
Well, it's a benchmark of the world's leading global websites, and I've been doing it since 2003, which is a long time. I know. I started it a long time ago.
I'm doing the math in my head, and the math kind of depresses me.
It's depressing. I know. I'm dating myself.
Exactly.
Clearly.
Wow.
When I did it, I thought it would be a one-off. Mm-hmm. And, I was just curious.
What is it? What is it, first of all?
Well, it looks at how companies take their websites global.
Okay.
And at the time, when I started it, web globalization was relatively novel practice. There were not that many companies that had expanded beyond English. And I think at the time, 10 languages was roughly the average. And that's, taking into account, say, a Microsoft. And of course, Facebook didn't exist. And a lot of these companies that we now know today didn't exist, these web companies. So at the time, I was really looking, I had a localization background at the time, and when I co-founded Byte Level, the goal was really to just focus on just the art and science of web globalization. And this project, I kept it simple. I thought a report card's a great model. It was every website gets a score from 0 to 100. It's kind of conceptually pretty basic. Yeah. And there's 4 quadrants that I benchmark websites on, and those quadrants have remained the same over these many years, even though the details within each quadrant has changed. And so that's just one way of just looking at these websites. And it's not just benchmarking, but also I really wanted to push the industry forward. It definitely has a point of view, this report.
Well, everything has everything has a point of view, right? But
right.
The reason I say is because we haven't been around since 2003, but Nimsy, when we founded, that was kind of what we wanted to do, and what we continue to try to do is to push the industry forward, right?
Absolutely.
And not just the localization industry, but multiple industries. So we share a common goal in that. I found this on the website here. I found this video, and I started watching it, but then I stopped because I thought, let's watch this together live.
Oh yeah. This is my intro to the report.
Yeah, so I'm going to play this, and this will give you guys that are watching a quick intro to the report before we get any much further. Also, though, if you're watching in the comments, these streams are interactive, right? So participate down on the comments. If there's chatter going on down there, we'll bring you guys up on screen. If you have any questions, comments, etc., you know the drill. I'll also give you a shout out. Without further ado, let's play this.
And this is the homepage of the New York Times. These are the products that Apple is selling. Here is Google, and this is the homepage of Facebook.com. Not quite the Facebook we know today. Also, in 2003, I published the first edition of the Web Globalization Report Card, my first attempt to benchmark the world's leading global websites, and the first report of its kind. And here we are in 2021, and I'm pleased to have published the most recent annual edition. Now, why a report card? Well, complexity is overrated. And from the very beginning, the report card relied on four major buckets or criteria, as shown on the right. And although the details within each of these criteria have evolved over time, by keeping a fundamental and consistent methodology, organizations have been able to measure their progress over time. But the report card isn't just methodology. It's also about identifying and evangelizing for emerging and established best practices. Now let's drill in on that methodology, beginning with global reach, the truly quantitative metric within the report card. I look at languages. I document every language supported by every website I look at. And over the years, as you can see here, the average number of languages has more than doubled to 33 today. And when you look at specific companies, you can see some growth rates are faster than others. But across the board, companies generally add languages. They have to, because, as I've long said, the internet connects computers, but language connects people. Now, global architecture is the internationalization aspect of web globalization, and it refers to elements such as the global templates that support not only desktop but mobile screens, not just within one market, but across all markets. Because as you start to scale up, you have to support an efficient range of templates. And not only does this make your life easier, it actually provides a better user experience because visitors to your website often navigate across different locales.
So just for the record, like I have a ton of questions and it's taking all my willpower not to like pause this and just start interrogating you. But let's finish it. We're halfway through.
So it's important to provide a level of consistency.
Sorry.
Now, localization isn't just about translating from source to target content. I also look at locally generated content, such as blogs shown here. I look at local language social media. And I also look at how machine translation is deployed, because all of these elements are what goes into localization today. And finally, global navigation, which is much more than the visual global gateway, which you see here. There are a number of technical and visual elements that a company can use to successfully provide a seamless experience to visitors, regardless of their language and regardless of where they live. I review every one of these websites. I've never outsourced this work. It can be tedious at times, but the value of doing it year in and year out is that I've learned how these companies have evolved quite intimately. And I speak to executives at many of these companies, so I learn what works and what doesn't work. And then every year, these best practices, these learned lessons get filtered back into the methodology, and I, of course, evangelize for these best practices, not only within the report, but within the best practices supplemental report. Now, out of all of these websites, here are the top 25. Congratulations to these organizations. Now, how do companies use the report card? Well, they use it for internal benchmarking.
Whoa.
Now, how do companies
see that?
All of these
Top
websites?
25.
There's the list, guys.
Yeah.
There's your freebie right there.
Oh, yeah.
That is a who's who right there.
Yeah,
All right.
here are the top 25.
We'll get back to that.
Congratulations to these organizations. Now, how do companies use the report card? Well, they use it for internal benchmarking. They use it for language planning. They really benefit when they use it before a global redesign. And of course, identifying ongoing localization trends is really, really important. And many companies have used this report for a decade or even longer. And the real value in doing so is not only do you create a more successful and world-ready website, you create world-ready employees, because this report is designed not just to inform, but to educate. So if you have any questions, please email me, visit the website at bytelevel.com or my blog at globalbydesign.com. Thank you.
Keep calm and go global.
Indeed.
That was a nice little intro. Like I said, there's just wow, it's juicy, it's beefy. So you tell me, what do I need to know about the Globalization Report Card? Why do clients, first of all, who do who uses this and why do they
Um,
use it? You touched on that in the video.
yeah, some of the people on that top 25, some of the companies on that top 25 list purchase it, and some that are not in the report at all purchase it. It
Hmm.
really varies. They're using it to improve generally.
Yeah.
And there are some, and this gets a little awkward sometimes. I don't, I don't. It's not a sponsored report. It's just a
Right.
report. And if you're on the top 25 list, I tell these companies you've done extremely well. You're well above average. They always want to get into that top five. Well, it's very difficult, obviously, because the
Yeah. I
metrics
want to
of the.
compete with Wikipedia too, but
Yeah, I know. Yeah, get over 250 languages, and we'll talk. Right.
exactly.
So yeah, so those metrics, they're destiny for why Wikipedia is number one and why Apple is lower on that list, for example. So yeah,
It,
it's it is what it is. But it has been it's nice to see people supporting it year in and year out. It's as a basic one person production. It's quite nice.
yeah, and you mentioned that you
Yeah,
said you don't outsource any of
yeah,
this. You
right.
do it yourself, and that caught my attention because I'm the guy that used to do it myself for
Yeah,
NIMSY. Like that
yeah,
once upon a time, if you read some research that NIMSY put out, it was very high likelihood that it was written by yours truly.
yeah,
And since then, we've hired good writers.
yeah.
So I don't write anything anymore. And there's something to be said for getting your hands dirty,
Yeah.
working on the same report. Like for example, we have Sarah Hickey, our VP of research here, and every year she manages the NIMSY 100 report, which is our ranking of the language
Yeah.
services industry. She manages the interpreting index. It's our biannual report and talking about the interpreting market, language companies in the interpreting market. And year over year, she just gets intimate with
Mhm.
these. I mean, there's no better word for it, intimacy.
Right. No, it's absolutely right. Yeah.
And
And yeah, many years ago, I had the I guess I had the chance to grow, and I just I don't know. I didn't make that decision. So we are small by design, and I think there are definitely benefits to growing like you guys are growing, which is quite evident. And it would be
yeah,
great to have colleagues
there's
to.
definitely headaches too
Yeah.
involved
No.
with growth. So
Uh,
I
no.
respect people that stay small. I mean, know
Yeah.
what you want and do
Yeah.
it because you're putting
Yeah.
out a good product. But yeah, having colleagues is nice.
It would be nice. That's the one thing I do miss
Yeah.
because it does get a little. There's a bit of an echo chamber, and I do consulting, which is really how I interact with a lot of these organizations. So in a sense, I'm working indirectly with a lot of companies, but at the end of the day, it's just me and a few cats and my wife, and it can get a little lonely at times.
Yeah, I hear ya. I hear ya. Speaking of getting a little lonely, we already got some chatter going down here. Prince E, please show me the email address again. I will bring that up. John Yunker. Um,
The PowerPoint
how do I bring that back?
presentation.
Where was that? Oh, it was in the.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
There we go. There it is for you.
Well, and you've got the PowerPoint via YouTube, so you're
Yep, exactly. So I'll put a link to this. This is
okay.
just a YouTube video that we're showing. It's not a PowerPoint
Yeah.
presentation. I'll put a link to this in the description over here on LinkedIn when we wrap it all up. Or I can try to do it right now. I have limited. Oh, I can't do it to LinkedIn. Um, we'll get it to you. Don't worry. All right. Any other chatter down there? Nope. Like I said, leave comment if you're watching this live. Leave comments in the chat. If you're watching this after the fact, because it will be available on all of the platforms afterwards, then you can still leave a comment. Just I probably won't answer you because we're not here. So yeah, so I totally appreciate that. Rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, getting to know it. I'm sure you have some stories to tell
Stories.
about some companies that started out on the list and now they're not. Some companies that have skyrocketed up the list.
Yeah, gosh, let me think. I mean, I always there's a lot of NDAs that I have to sign to the consultants, so that I'm trying to bypass that. I'll speak in general terms.
There we go. There we go.
Um, well,
It's like a large fruit-themed Silicon Valley-based
yes,
iPhone producing company. Yeah, no,
yes.
and
No,
we don't need to do that either. Just
no. Apple's a good one
okay.
because
Apple's the one with the tightest NDAs, so let's watch
yeah.
out. We're live.
No. Apple. I can speak from the outside on Apple. I use Apple. I like Apple, but I have long been critical of Apple.
Mhm.
This is the first time they made the top 25, actually, and
Huh.
uh, they punch below their weight in terms of languages. I every year I get more critical, and in fact, this was the first year that to get a top score in that global reach category, you have to support 50 or more languages.
Hmm.
So every year that's gone up. I mean, I think I'd have to go and check the first one, but I think back then, if you supported a dozen languages, you were global. That's what companies were calling themselves global in 2003 if they supported 10, because
Well, yeah.
that was it. That was, and the internet itself. Though, if you looked at the audience, people that were on the internet, it was majority English, native English speakers. But now, the majority native English speakers make up fewer than 20% of all internet users. So Apple to me is I have been critical of them in that regard, but I did praise them for dropping flags in the fall, which was from their global gateway. So that was a huge step for them forward and avoids a
Yeah.
lot of issues and allows them to scale a little bit better. And
The flags.
well,
We've had several, and Apple.
mm,
I like that you say that they punch below their weight because I like to look at Apple as kind of like one of the leaders, like,
mhm.
and I'll tell this to folks that we consult with, and it's like, look, if you're just starting out, if you're a startup, and sure, you could do the market research and understand which markets to prioritize, and you can hire an MZ to do that for you,
Right.
or just do what Apple does. Right? Like if their customer base, because sometimes it's like you look at someone's website and you're like, yeah, you're trying to copy Apple. So, you know what I'm saying? Like you just
Yeah.
skip the market research,
Yeah.
just do what Apple does, right? And so it caught my attention when you said that they've been disappointing you. Um,
Well, given that, well, I highlighted Vietnam, for example. They don't
okay,
have a Vietnam website formally, but
okay,
the Apple ID page is localized into Vietnamese. So you can tell internally there's a pressure to serve this important audience, and yet they haven't gone all in yet. And it clearly is not a budgetary issue. There are
yeah,
obviously small to medium organizations. There's a lot more budgetary issues when you're starting to go global, but when you're of that size, I just think they clearly they have the means to do a better job of serving a customer base that already exists
all right.
in many of these markets.
You hear that out there, but Apple budget owners,
Yes, yeah,
they
and
send
I
more
do
money to the globalization team.
exactly, and I do empathize. I know it's hard to, it's hard to make the case for more dollars internally. I mean,
Well, because
it's
you
always difficult.
also, and you said it in the beginning, is that once you go into a language, like it's easy to add languages. Like you said, on average, people are doing twice as many languages as they were back in 2015. I think you said, or
Hmm.
correct me if
Yeah,
I'm wrong.
yeah,
But very hard to take away languages once the markets get used to that
absolutely.
localization. So, what do you have any case studies on that? Like companies that have
There,
pulled out of markets? How do you
uh,
do that?
one of the more notable companies that did over the past year would be Cisco.
Okay. Yeah.
They dropped the number of markets
Hmm.
in terms of localization support, and that hurt them in the score and the ranking. It does happen. I was surprised over the past year. With COVID and just all this uncertainty, I kind of thought there'd be a lot more of a pullback because there's certainly, if you're an executive who's looking to cut costs, and language services is an area that's often targeted. It
Right.
just is.
Yeah. Well,
It's
because it's not very well understood,
exactly.
and if you don't understand something, and you're looking at a P&L statement and trying to make cuts, you're going to
Mhm.
cut the stuff that you don't understand.
exactly. And like you said too, and I thought it was a good point. You said localization is a shadow industry. It's just
Yeah,
not.
I like that
And
term.
that's something
I'm playing
you know,
around with that term. You can
no,
use
it's
it.
great.
You can
Yeah.
use it.
Well, no, it's what's something I kind of touch on with this book, Think Outside the Country. I use this term translation economy. And I was trying to make the point that, you know, 10 years ago, everyone was talking about the information economy. You know, it's this global information economy. Well, it's really not if an information economy if you don't understand the information that you have access to. It
Right.
is a translation economy. You have to be able to understand the content for it to mean anything. And people seem to lose that. And why it always drives me a little nuts sometimes when within organizations how they really skimp on translation budget, yet they don't question their English language website. There was never really much of an argument when
Right.
companies started doing English language websites. They didn't say, "Well, do we really want to do it in English?" You know, or that was assumed, right?
Right.
English is an assumed. You've got to support English,
Yeah.
and it's a shame. It's been such a struggle to get to these baseline assumptions. Of course, we have them for a number of languages: German and Chinese and Japanese and so forth. But it's a steady growth. It's a steady climb, and companies generally don't pull back over time. And so that I do look at actions, and actions do paint a picture of increasing global reach.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to get Prince here. If it looks like I'm distracted, I'm trying to get you the link here. And bam, there we go.
Ah,
You got it. So that's your link to John's video.
there you go, Prince.
Over there. Okay. But God, I need to learn how to multitask better. That's that really
You
threw
and
me.
me both.
That really threw me off right there. All right, so we talked about the companies that you're looking at. We talked about Apple. We talked about pulling out of markets. What is companies that aren't on the list? What do they need to do? Because that's what I mean. Odds are the people that are watching right now don't work for one of those companies, right?
Right.
But maybe they want to push their program into it. Maybe this is something, because this is the type of thing that gets attention from senior management. And I've been doing a lot of talking, a lot of workshops with enterprise side teams that are all around like, all right, how do we get more respect? How do we get more love? How do we get, let's be honest, how do we get more budget from senior management, right? And this looks like a ticket here because it's from an authoritative source that's been doing it for a while. And if I can make a case based on this, like my goal is to bring our organization into the top 50, into the top 25, whatever it may be. This is just all a long-winded way to ask a question. What tips do you have? Like, where should they prioritize their time?
I would say fundamental is, and you mentioned Apple. This is a credit to Apple is global consistency. There are some companies that support a huge number of languages that didn't make the top 25. The automotive sector is actually famous for this, with the exception of Tesla.
Okay.
And I often point out Tesla because Tesla was.
And by consistency, before we go, you mean like brand consistency, like user experience consistency?
Website, global consistency on the website.
On the website,
They've created these global templates that they support globally.
Okay.
That and you don't necessarily need one template, but you do need to have a degree of consistency, market to market. And there can be exceptions. There's room for exceptions, particularly with Asia, but by and large, global consistency is really gospel these days. And it just, you look at the majority of the companies in the top 25 have a large degree of that. And sometimes it's only regional, like it's EMEA. You might just have it in Europe. But it's hard to argue against that from an efficiency standpoint. To really scale up, you're going to have to get everyone on board. Because odds are, if you don't have global consistency, you're going to have other problems because it means you're not coordinating well with your offices around the world.
Yeah.
Perhaps. So if you're not even on the same page in terms of workflow and understanding with other offices around the world, well, global consistency forces everyone to kind of agree to some degree of working together
Hmm.
with some
Yeah.
shared goals. And then you can drill down on localization and local flexibility within those markets. Because what I find when there's lack of global consistency, what we see a lot in local markets is they're doing redesigns when they don't need to be doing redesigns. They really should be focusing more on supporting the local language social feeds, creating local content, and things like that, rather than doing a new redesign. And sometimes that's a result of very decentralized companies that have their own budgets,
Yeah.
you know. So
With the
it's a tough battle to win, but you can do it. And companies that have done it have. I don't know of any company that got on board with global consistency and then went back again. Said that didn't screw it, doesn't work. We're out of here. We're going to go back. You know,
well, yeah, nobody that went back intentionally, probably. I think
true,
the
true.
law of entropy definitely applies
Oh,
to such
you're right.
things. So
Yeah,
if you have consistency is like one of those things that's like you fight for constantly. Like
you
you
do.
have to own it. Like when we started Nimsy, slight tangent, I was very protective of what technologies I allowed into the company. I'm like, no, we are on an ecosystem. We have built a foundation. Here is the software suites we are using. Get your Trello out of here. We're not, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, it was this constant battle because everything just kind of worked. And
Yeah,
if you're not constantly watching that, things go right. And website management is certainly no different. Like the entropy definitely applies. So, great advice for people wanting to get onto the list.
yeah.
The question that I keep thinking, though, is that sounds a lot easier to build out than it does to recreate
Hmm.
or it does to fix, if you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
No, you're
So,
right.
the next question I would have is what advice would you have for these companies that maybe it's not mince words. Failed to create consistent. Did not prioritize creating a consistent web experience for their global users, and now are reevaluating. Maybe there's been a change in priorities. Maybe some new hotshot globalization director just got hired, and they want to fix that. What advice would you have for the company as a whole? And
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you have for the globalization director, who is perhaps the person that best understands the problem, but needs help communicating that what needs to happen to the other stakeholders?
That's a good question. Well, I would say you can get your marketing team on board with making the case that you're going to make their jobs a lot easier. If they're doing
Okay.
global rollouts of a product, for example, and go back to Apple. When they launch an iPad generally it's global, a new device, a new product, new service. It's got to be live within a few hours on all of the markets around the world. Well, if you have a template, you can do that. You can align and deploy that really, really quickly versus, okay, Germany's got 400 pixels by 200 pixels, Japan's got 900 pixels, all of those little details. So I think it's marketing's, you can get them on board on efficiency and time to market. I also think it's really important to focus on the users and the customers and their experience,
Yes.
because odds are, and the data will often back this up, is if your .com site is probably seeing, as you start to grow global, you're probably seeing 50% or more traffic from outside your core market. And say you're a U.S. company and you're expanding, you're seeing more than 50% coming from outside the U.S. And then how? So if you think about it from their perspective, someone lands on .com and then they've got to go to a .de or a .fr website. What's their experience going to be? Like if they've got a whole nother site now to learn, a new architecture, a new design, new navigation scheme, that's a bump. That's not necessarily the best user experience for them. So I think you have to think about this, take this holistic view of your customer. So that's another argument. And then finally, I would say if you're really having a hard time making this work, find one market that is on board. Work with the markets that are on board
Yeah.
with you. You're gonna have outliers. I mean, even I know there's a lot of global companies that I work with, and there's almost always a one or two markets that kind of want to do their own thing, and they get a longer leash, and they make a good case for it. And Japan is a good example.
I was going to say,
China.
do you want to start listing them, or should I?
Yes,
It's
well,
the
you
usual
list,
suspects, right?
yeah,
It's like
the usual
Japan,
suspects.
Germany, China, um, all of them. But yeah, Japan in particular, it's
Yeah,
like that's the market that will make or break an entire program.
right.
It's an
Absolutely,
entire
yeah.
program.
And if you've got a good team there and they know what they're doing, you've got to let them run with it. But still, if you can work with shared commonalities in terms of architecture, in terms of software platform, odds are you can reach some level of so going back to the pilot project, what I like is with a lot of global companies, there's this parent-child dynamic, which is really not all that healthy in the sense that HQ does a redesign and then sends it out and tells all the children, which are the other countries generally and markets, and you say, you guys got to use this new CMS and new design. And then they're not happy. They weren't included oftentimes in the redesign. Well, if you can find a market that you can do a pilot with and then let them present to the siblings, if you will,
Yeah.
then it's not top down as much as, hey, look what we did. We're Italy, and look what we were able to save time with this new template. We're our revenues have increased. We've generated this many new leads, and let them pitch to the siblings. And not, yeah,
It's sales is
it
what it
is.
is.
You're absolutely right.
And this is what I tell people. And when I talk to enterprise side globalization directors and teams and globalization project managers is your job should be sales to a certain extent, sales and marketing. A globalization department should have a sales and marketing arm to it, or an evangelization arm, an education arm, whatever you want to call it, where you're going out and you're helping your stakeholders. That's what sales does, by the way. Sales doesn't make money. Sales adds value, right? So they go out and they talk to these people and they understand what are your requirements and stuff like that. And they convince them to follow localization best practices because they're just doing what they want to do. And specifically, like talking about decentral organizations where there's subsidiary offices that have a lot of control over the situation. Like, why would they? Why would they want to centralize? I can think of an example, which I can't remember what my NDA is, so I'm not going to use names, but it's like they're trying to centralize everything, all of the localization into one program so that they can use team. Because these people, it was the Wild West. Like each individual region had managed their own stuff. Some of them worked with freelancers, some of them used CAT tools, some of them used MT, some of them didn't. Wild, right? So there's this big effort to centralize it, to which it's like the Chinese market is asking, well, why would I send all of my translations to you so I can be cross-charged literally twice as much, sometimes 3 times as much as what I can get it for on the local market, right? And you need to have a good answer for that. You really need to have a good answer for that. And that's where sales comes in. You need to sell them. You need to sell your local Chinese guys on and here's why. Here's why you can add the value.
No, you're right. It's when you centralize, there is a degree of losing some degree of control and freedom. It is kind of like a pendulum.
Flexibility, right?
Yeah, it goes back and forth. But the extremes on either side are where I try to keep companies out of. It's this too centralized and too decentralized. If you can find, there's always going to be tension. There's always going to be tension. But
as there should be, right?
Right. And the other thing too is it's a lot of like sales. It's also about listening, because you will have local offices that are doing things, that have discovered things. Maybe they've developed some new technologies, widgets, whatever, or just sales techniques that other offices should be aware of. So they need to be able to share that as well. It can't just be top down. We know everything at HQ and you guys do it. It has to be much more collaborative, and it's challenging. It's not easy. And, most organizations, I'd like to think even the ones on the top 25, they're struggling. They never feel like they're done. it's a process.
No, and we're not. None of us are. We're never
No,
done, right? So that's not a bad
no,
thing
no,
to never feel like
no.
you're done. But I always kind of chuckle because in my past lives and current life, as I've gotten the opportunity, like you, maybe not as intimately as you, but I'm familiar with a lot of these brands and how
Mhm.
they run their globalization, how they decide which markets to go into, how they translate, what technology they're using. And I chuckle every time I meet someone who has this perception that, well, surely Apple has everything perfect, right? Surely Microsoft, surely Facebook, surely because these are big brands, they've heard of them
Yeah,
before. Surely
right.
Tesla has a very streamlined operation.
Oh, yeah.
And hey, this ain't no hate to any of the like brands I just
No, no, no.
did or
You're
didn't mention, may or may not have been familiar with before.
yeah,
It's just, yeah, we're all figuring this out.
right. And the ground shifts every few months or years based on geopolitics.
Oh,
That's what
geez.
keeps our lives really, really interesting. With Russia and China and Brazil, and that has major policy implications. I was speaking with one company many years ago, a large tech company, and it was after the Snowden affair
Oh, what?
became
Yeah.
global news, and I said this is going to impact everybody.
Mm.
Because some countries, Germany comes to mind, are much more sensitive about their personal data and where that data is being transmitted. Is it going to the U.S. And then back again? And when it goes to the U.S., is it gets passed through a NSA server? Those things really matter to people around the world in various markets, and that could have major implications for where you host your website, how you interact with your customers, and this tech company didn't quite see it yet, but because tech companies tend to be very much they trust in technology to such a degree, that sometimes that can be a
Yeah.
little
The
dangerous.
almighty algorithm,
I know,
right?
and there's like there's two localization worlds. There's like the Silicon Valley local; they
Yeah.
live in their own world. They're at a
You're
higher,
so right.
and then there's the rest of the world,
Yeah.
and I have to modulate what I say to each audience based on who they are and what world they live
It's true. I think my like comfort zone is probably more with that Silicon Valley crowd, which isn't just Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley is a state of mind. Silicon
in.
Valley is not a
Exactly.
place, okay?
Right.
And I think it's an HBO show, which I've never seen, but everyone tells me I can. You mentioned, I want to ask this because before I forget it, you talked about the change, the evolution that this industry is constantly going through. And earlier in this conversation, you also talked about how you've been using the same metrics over time so that you can get an
Hmm.
apples to apples comparison. And you've evolved the report over the years to reflect things that are currently trending. So, for example, you changed the criteria to make it into the top 25 and blah, blah, blah,
Hmm.
blah. So, my question is, how have you seen the industry evolve? Because you'd be watching this because you need to take it into account in your report. How have you seen the industry evolve, and how have you seen the industry fail to evolve? As far as like the globalization, this shadow industry
Hmm.
that fuels the engines of international growth.
That's a good question. I think it's evolved well. Well, global consistency, for example, when I started
Yeah.
out, that was not an assumed best practice. It was a very much disputed best practice, I would say. And now I feel like I don't have to sell that anymore. I
It's
don't have to
taken.
sell languages to some degree. It is still like there are some markets where it is still a struggle. Some languages where I still have to really evangelize for that, that's disappointing to me because I'm at the end of the day, I consider myself a user evangelist. It bothers me to see companies that are already selling in these markets. And this is actually the problem is they say, well, we're already selling in these markets. Why do we need to now localize for the market? Which uh, is tone deaf, I think. So I'm a little, I feel like it would have been nice to see us growing more quickly linguistically. And I think it has hurt some companies, because their reluctance to scale quickly has allowed local competitors to flourish.
Right.
And so that has hurt them in the end. And it's also prevented them from understanding their markets as well as they needed to. Because the
Hmm.
process of localization is you learning more about the market, not just translating. It's
Oh, yeah.
about you really
You can't
getting
help
into
it.
that market.
You
You
can't
can't
help
help
but
it, right?
learn
Yeah,
just going through that process,
right.
especially if you're coming from outside of the localization crowd,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, that's a lot of, especially you're growing companies, a lot of globalization, first time globalization directors, it's the first time they've heard the word localization, globalization, internationalization is when they saw it on their job description, right?
Yes.
And God bless. I mean, I've worked with some people that they just got thrown into localization
Yeah.
and it's like, help me,
Right.
right?
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's complicated. And machine translation is an area that I think,
Here we go. Here we go.
yeah, I evangelized for this early on. I mean, every and in a way, I guess we have tech companies to thank for really pushing it to the mainstream, and it's Google and all the other platforms that have enabled it in Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. You can self-translate content now.
Yeah.
So what I always tell people is that you know the expectation is now, if it's not in my language, I should be able to self-translate it
That's the
myself, even
expectation.
though,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not extra
And
credit anymore. That's
no. And
it.
why aren't you, as a Fortune 500 company, unlocking your content via an MT tool like that? You could do it, but it's a tough sell still, and it surprises me to see that. Uh, the Silicon Valley, it's a different discussion, like you said. But when you get outside of Silicon Valley, you're still dealing with, well, the quality's not that good, and then legal gets involved, and it's all of this stuff, and in many cases they don't even know their vendors are using it, and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
don't even know that they're using it
Yeah.
internally.
A
Yeah.
a
So,
lot of misconceptions out there around MT, machine
mhm.
translation. But there's also a lot of good information out there around machine translation. And here's what I tell people about MT is like it's past the point where it's possible for you to learn everything there is to learn about it, unless that's your full-time job, right? Like if,
Yeah.
if you're the MT guy, then yeah, sure, that's you. But if you're, just the director, the VP of international, whatever. It's like you're not going. I don't care how many webinars you go to. You're not going to learn everything there is to go. Get a guy, right? Get a
Yeah.
guy that you trust. Get a
Yeah.
consultant. Get somebody,
Yeah.
and get a vendor. Vendors love, like if you're working with one of the big guys, especially, right? And tell them
Mhm.
I want to talk to a solution architect,
Mhm.
and then talk to them about MT. There's also good nowadays. There's companies out there specializing in this kind of stuff. You got Intento. Out there, they're doing a lot of work around MT, like choosing the best MT. Check them out.
Hmm.
I know Constantine Dranch has a company, MT Insights. MT. I'm sorry,
Huh.
Kostya. I
No, I
can't
haven't. I
remember.
haven't heard of that. Yeah.
I'm trying to plug you, Kostya, but I
Yeah.
can't remember it. But he's doing
Yeah.
great work. I hear he's he's a NIMSY alumni.
Ah.
So
Cool.
he went off to bigger and better things. But yeah, MT,
Yeah.
you've used the word scalable or scalability probably half a hundred, like a
Yeah.
couple dozen times in this
Yeah.
talk so far, because it's important. It's not just a buzzword. And
Mm.
I don't know how you can run a scalable localization program without MT being part of that
Yeah.
equation. Like it
You're
just
right.
has to be.
Mm.
Especially with user generated content. Tell me about user generated content because you talked about that in the video. How does that
Mm.
factor into the report card?
It factors into the localization judging. There's user generated and then client generated, or company generated content. So blogs, obviously, and case studies and video content, which is definitely becoming much more important. And then user generated is anything social platform related or something that fits in this hybrid MVP, if you will, area where they might have customers that are heavy users of a product and they are promoted by the company within those markets. It's an area that actually it's when I talk to smaller companies, this is where I try to focus their attention. If you're expanding globally, your audience, your users, your customers are your best salespeople.
Right.
In the end, it obviously depends on the market, but
we actually have research on that, and you're right.
Yeah.
It does depend on per market because we look at like across markets, like I forget how it's phrased, but how influential recommendations from trusted friends and family are. And there's a variance between cultures.
Oh, that's interesting. So I say that's an area where you might be able to get some good localization content on your local sites. The problem with local sites in your tier 3 or smaller markets, the markets where when I say tier 3, I mean these might be markets where a company's just starting out in, and they've put them in to the bottom tier, and they don't have a lot of resources. They're not going to professionally translate the bulk of their content yet. They're testing the water.
Dipping their toe in the water.
They're
watching
dipping their
the
toe.
analytics.
So the danger, of course, is if you dip your toe, are you doing it? Are you giving them a relevant website? Are you giving them a good experience? And sometimes they're not, and then it creates a negative feedback loop. And then the company goes, well, we failed in the market, even though they really didn't do much in the market.
No, you did fail in the market, but you failed in the market because of your own damn fault. This is why I tell people is like, in this day and age, and I am a big fan of the prototype, test, iterate, move fast, break things. I'm a big fan of that. I love it. However, when entering a new market, be very cautious. You can dip your toe in, watch the analytics, but if you're not doing it in an intelligent way, you're basically giving up your only chance to make a first impression on that market.
You're right. Yeah. I call it a local facade, if you will. It's just, the visitor in that market, they go to your website, and you said first impression. What a lousy first impression. They land there. There's nothing of value, very little translated content probably, and then they're gone, and that's it. And then you've got the
TikTok age. There's a TikTok generation, right? Like you've got half a second before you swipe, before they swipe away. This is like we've been doing a lot of work here at NIMSY to get our websites faster because they were just low. I'm not a web guy. I don't know why. We have Alexei over there in Poland. Poland now? Yeah, he lives in Poland doing all of this. He's our CTO. But it's like that. The difference between a website that loads in 1 second versus 3 seconds is the difference between whether I read that website. Like, seriously, I will click away that quickly.
You're right. And that is actually that is actually a huge part of the report card now, performance. And I look, you can't look at everything, but I do look at the weight in bytes, if you will. I actually weigh the mobile website. And
byte level research.
It's down to the bits and bytes. And it's something you can control. And it's amazing how many companies are just overweight, if you will. And they're not really thinking, well, if they're not, they might be thinking it might display fine in a developed market, a really high speed broadband connection, but it's not going to display well in a 3G or 4G, or honestly, even in a developed market at the airport, where it's a tax network.
Right.
So
tax network, is that why I can never get good reception at the airport? I need to Google that. I've always wondered that, but out of scope of this conversation, probably.
Yeah. So because the average right now, the global the websites I look at, the average is 9 megabytes.
9 megabytes.
That's huge. That's
all right. Alexei.
Contrast that with. Well, Facebook and Google try to keep it under a megabyte.
Wow.
They try to stand.
And the average is 9.
The average is 9. In fact, that's why we've seen this trend of apps, mobile apps, like those light apps
Mm-hmm.
for emerging markets. So that's why the Facebook Lite, Twitter Lite, Uber Lite. It's also a lightweight app that can be downloaded more quickly and consume less data in emerging markets. Because if you're paying for data, and data is expensive, you're very sensitive to the consumption of that data, and that's why users in some markets will turn their phones off and on a lot just to manage data consumption. It's quite honestly, I've been on data plans, and I do that. And
Yeah.
I for a while I had a mobile data plan. I got cheap on my mobile phone, and I started blowing past those limits, and suddenly I started thinking about data consumption, and did I
Mm-hmm.
want to stream this video, or and that I think is positive. And in fact, I'd read that Facebook several years ago was actually throttling their internet access internally, and I don't know if they still do this, but they were trying to give their employees the experience of what it might be like to be a user in many markets around the world.
I respect that. That's cool.
I do too.
I
Yeah.
think we forget. Like, I'm sitting here with a gigabyte fiber optic cable, which is one of two internet connections that I have running into this house, and I have my 5G iPhone 12. And it's like I forget how spoiled I am, and because I think, Nimsy's website loads fast enough? It's fine. Yeah, it loads fast enough for me. Right? What about
Right.
the people in the waiting in the line at the airport in Lagos? How's it loading for them? Right? On an iPhone 6.
It's true.
Well, and speaking of which, I think the internet throttling gods are displeased with our conversation because your resolution is going out. Sorry about that. I
Oh
don't
my
know.
God. Yeah. See, I do not have a high-speed connection.
Yeah, you look so crisp. They're listening. They don't like what we're
Hopefully,
talking about.
it'll catch up here. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, we are coming up on the hour here. We've been I know it doesn't seem like it, but we've been at this for an hour. I'd love to do this again with you, though,
Sure,
John.
I'd love to. This has been great.
Yeah, there's so many things. And think if we actually prepared beforehand.
Yes, indeed.
For those of you, if anyone's watching, if anyone's made it this far, like, this is the first time John and I actually ever met. It was about 10 minutes before coming live today. So, Jonathan, thank you very much.
This has been wonderful. Yeah, thank you for having me. This is wonderful. I would love to do it again.
Awesome. Well, everybody, go check it out. Byte Level Research, the Globalization Report Card from Byte Level Research and John Yunker. I want to know more, and I just got done talking to him about it for an hour. So you should go check it out yourself. Really quickly, closing up here, thank you to Nimsy for letting us monopolize our streams today. Stay tuned because we're going to have more people coming live from Nimsy. So if you're sick of seeing my fat face on here, we're going to be getting Sarah Hickey up here. We've got some other exciting guests coming up. We're going to be talking about interpreting. We're going to be talking about evangelization and localization for religious organizations. Lots of good topics coming up. But until then, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Once again, my name is Tucker Johnson, tucker@nimsy.com. Ping me on LinkedIn. We're here to help. Ciao.